Time for UpFront Fridays, a look at the week in Wisconsin politics. As we first told you yesterday, a petition from Democratic groups and candidates is asking Wisconsin Supreme Court to throw out the state's current congressional maps, despite a similar request being thrown out last year. Matt Smith, executive producer and host of UpFront, also political director at WISN. Matt, let's start out. First question, yesterday's petition by Democratic groups to the Supreme Court to toss out Wisconsin's congressional maps. This is the second time it's happened. And do you believe that this time they're going to have some success?
Yeah, possibly. Listen, I mean, this was really expected after Susan Crawford won the Supreme Court race in April, giving liberals control of the court now for at least the next couple of years. And this really became a center point of this campaign, is these congressional maps. You remember all this chatter when she sat on this call with Democratic donors. The invite talked about congressional maps. She said, well, I have nothing to do with that. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to weigh in. It became a centerpiece of our debate ahead of the election. The question really is going to be is how quickly the Supreme Court is going to take this up. A, will they take up either of these lawsuits? Now, 2 have been filed this past week. And then there's going to be issues of recusal. You can bet that Republicans or certain groups are going to ask whether it be Justice Protasiewicz or Justice-elect Crawford to recuse themselves. How are they going to handle it? So there's a lot that's going to play out. And in these lawsuits, Democrats want this resolved, of course, ahead of the midterms to give them a better chance at winning a couple of seats. So it could be some fast drama as Susan Crawford takes her seat on the Supreme Court August 1st.
This week, you're also talking to the top 3 members of the state's budget committee, who this week removed more than 600 of Governor Tony Evers' budget proposals, including some with bipartisan support. Do you see any of these budget proposal items coming back, or is this all going to be a done deal?
So in the budget, likely not. The 2 Republican co-chairs kind of made that pretty clear in our interview that you'll see on Sunday. But they said, listen, there's other avenues for some of this legislation that they see as policy issues, not in the budget. They said, listen, let's introduce a separate bill, especially these ones, Jason, that you mentioned that had bipartisan support, and maybe move it through the legislative process. Some of these provisions already have separate bills. So there could be a separate track for some of these pieces of legislation. But it's going to be really interesting now to see how these negotiations go over the next couple weeks. July 1 is technically the deadline for the budget to be signed by the governor, and there is a ton of work to be done. Whether you look at tax cuts, whether you look at all this discussion around prisons and what will happen with Green Bay and all the other prisons across the state. So there is a lot of work to be done, and both sides are kind of starting to put their stakes in the sand at this point.
Yeah, Matt, and all of this is coming just off a decision by the state Supreme Court to uphold the governor's line item veto powers. So how could that potentially impact how the state budget might be written up?
So we asked about that, and Republicans, they're working really hard to literally have no numbers in the state budget, at least in terms of years and probably dollar figures. So what you're going to see as Republicans draft their version is literally like the year spelt out in words, as opposed to 2027 for 2027, and likely dollar figures spelled out in words. They're hoping that would prevent the governor from being able to make changes like he did the last budget with that 400-year veto increased in education funding. So it's going to be curious to see what the budget looks like, but they're not hiding the fact that they're going to attempt to do this to get around the governor's veto powers.
And another story that's being watched closely all across the country, you are also talking to a former U.S. District Judge that is leading a group of former judges against the arrest of Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan. What can you expect from that conversation?
Yeah, listen, this is fascinating. First, Judge Dugan from Milwaukee County, she's expected back in court next week for her a preliminary hearing in federal court, so that's going to be something to watch. Ahead of that, you have 150 judges from across the country, former state and federal judges, some appointed by Democrats, some appointed by conservatives, who are essentially blasting the Trump administration for the way this arrest went down. They're not necessarily speaking to the accusations themselves, but the fact that she was arrested in the courthouse, the fact that she was handcuffed, the fact that the FBI director posted a picture of Judge Dugan in handcuffs. These judges say, listen, we see this as the administration attempting to intimidate judges across the country, and we're not going to have it, this group of judges say. So it's a fascinating conversation and kind of a fascinating side conversation that's happening to this case that's going to play out really in dramatic fashion across the country.
And finally, our new pope from just south of Wisconsin's border. How are you handling that this Sunday?
Jaron is down in Chicago as we speak, covering that. We're going to have the show from part of Chicago. Listen, there's a ton of influence, even across Wisconsin. People who know Pope Leo, people especially in the Chicagoland area. It's an incredible experience for Catholics. So we're going to explore a little more broadly just the impact on the Catholic Church, the impact on politics, what this new Pope may weigh in on, may not weigh on. It's some fascinating conversations that we're going to have, both from here across Wisconsin and down in Chicago, of course, where he was born.
Thanks, Matt. We look forward to the show on Sunday morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jason. Have a good weekend.
And of course, you can see UpFront this and every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. right here on WBAY TV2.